Thanks, Acting Premier. Good morning. So, of course, it's terrific to see a day of no cases in Victoria, no locally acquired cases, one in hotel quarantine. And as the Acting Premier said, huge thanks to all of those, especially involved in testing, those who come for testing, really every Victorian who's thought about their symptoms and gone and got tested at the very first sign, all of the path labs that are doing that testing in huge numbers still, and all of the testing site staff, as well as the hospital staff who continue to care for the few patients who are in hospital. But the week ahead probably won't be all zeros. We've still got thousands of primary close contacts, some of whom may well become positive. That's not a concern as they quarantine for their entire period. But it's only been 48 hours since we've had cases of uncertain acquisition. So the family that have travelled to Queensland and the Reservoir household are both still under investigation for exactly how it might have been acquired. So that's a real lesson that we may yet see cases. There's still lots of investigation to go and a really strong reason for everyone with symptoms to get tested, because you might be part of those unknown chains of transmission. So we really do need to keep our efforts up. All of those things that are still in place in Victoria are part of those efforts, including wearing masks indoors and out. They are measures that work to reduce transmission, to reduce the opportunities for contact with others. We do nonetheless continue to release a number of primary close contacts, especially as they receive their negative day 13 test, complete their 14 days of quarantine and go about their lives. We, as of yesterday, had 4,300 primary close contacts, having cleared another 900. So we're working through those bit by bit. They've all been staying home, doing the right thing, and my huge thanks to them. Yesterday, the public health teams continued the rapid response to the new Reservoir household outbreak. 4 household contacts have tested positive. No clear acquisition source as yet. Obviously, in terms of managing those cases, their primary and secondary close contacts have been identified. Some of the critical primary close contacts have already been tested and tested negative, but we, again, need to look as to where they might have acquired their infection and keep investigating all of those close contacts. The genomic sequencing's come back for that family, and it does suggest a Kappa variant, so it's consistent with the city of Whittlesea and Port Melbourne and aged care cases all being of that variant. Following interviews with the positive cases, there are a number of potential exposure sites, but also acquisition sites, so where they might have been when another infectious case was. So please go to the website through the course of today. It'll be continuously updated just to see if any of those most recently added exposure sites apply to you and act accordingly. There will be some blood testing done for some of those cases as well to try and determine really how far into their infection they are, again, when it most likely began for some of those cases, to help us investigate exactly when it's been transmitted and where. We're also obviously looking into the source of exposure for the 2 Queensland cases. Following long interviews by the Queensland health authorities and New South Wales health authorities, they've also gone through a really long interview process with us. We do thank them for that. It's a tiring process, lots and lots of detail around where they've been. We are looking, quite a bit earlier than the 1st of June again for that acquisition, for where they might have picked it up. Whether or not they were infectious through that whole period is difficult to say. It does seem to be that they were right at the end of an infectious period when they've been tested in Queensland. So we have to go back some days to try and determine where they picked it up. But like the Reservoir household, the variant of concern appears to be the Kappa variant for these cases as well. Additionally, we've had several new wastewater detections recently. You'd be aware of those found in Bendigo, but we've also yesterday had detections in the Glenroy and Pascoe Vale area and some eastern suburbs in Whitehorse, Manningham and Monash. So again, a call out to all of those who are symptomatic across Victoria, but particularly for those areas with wastewater detections. And it really is those high testing numbers that will not only identify anyone who's not been identified as a primary close contact, who might be one of those cases who's had casual contact with somebody else who isn't aware that they've been exposed and who might be carrying the coronavirus. So terrific testing numbers, but we must maintain them. We're kind of at the halfway point in many respects. A day of zero is terrific. We've got a lot to run for all of those primary close contacts, all of those potential chains of transmission to be run down. So please bear in mind. And there are many people who've been tested, who've gotten over an illness, and of course we're in winter, who've developed symptoms again. So if it's a worsening of some normal symptoms, if you've had symptoms resolved, but again you've got upper respiratory tract infection symptoms, sore throat, runny nose, cough, fever, you really must get tested again. We will all go through winter as Victorians, probably needing to test once or twice or 3 times. That is the only way we can be sure we know where coronavirus is and to run it out of the state. In the long term, vaccination is our key. Having 20,000 people getting vaccinated through our state-run vaccination centres, absolutely fantastic. At least that many through our GPs every day. 50,000 people per day getting vaccinated in Victoria is absolutely fantastic, and the higher and higher coverage we get, the better off we are, and it is our long-term way out of this. Thanks so much. Tim. Thanks, Tim.
Brett, just in terms of the order regarding masks and outdoor use, now that you've identified a potential kappa link to the reservoir family of 4, does that give you some confidence that the decision can be made in the next few days to ease those restrictions?
I don't think so. Masks remain a really important intervention. I think Alan Cheng spoke to it yesterday. It still reduces transmission substantially. People move in and out of indoor and outdoor areas all the time, and it's not always easy to judge how close others are. It will, especially if both individuals are wearing a mask at the same time, reduce that risk of transmission. And transmission does happen outdoors. It is substantially less a risk. That's why we encourage a whole lot of activities to take place outdoors and for individuals to meet outdoors. But they still occur. And, the Rose Garden outside the White House is a classic example of a super spreading event that happened outdoors. So it's not to be dismissed as an opportunity for transmission.
So when will you review?
We review all the time, but as I said, we're 48 hours from mystery cases in Victoria. It's great that they're linked genomically, but we still need to run down exactly how they've been acquired. And some of these individuals, are still reporting relatively transient, contact in some of those exposure sites. So masks are those important measures that work in those areas as much as anywhere.
So you're saying today's zero?
No, I'm not nervous about opening up. We've always said we'll do the minimum restrictions that are required, and it's a balancing act. You don't want to open up to the extent that there's a really significant risk of this variant, any variant, running away from you, because the risk remains, and so many lessons from overseas around what that looks like. We don't want that to occur. So we're moving by increments and we're moving safely. But obviously we're not wanting to impose things that are excessive, but it's always under review because the risk remains until we've run all of this down.
So the zero one-off, is the zero one-off? Were you surprised by that?
No, I wasn't surprised by it. Obviously all of those primary close contacts isolating at home has helped control this. All of the contact tracing work has helped to control this, and all of the great testing that's been done has allow us to find cases and then control them. So we're going to get days of zero. I expect there'll be more. I also expect there'll be days where we have new cases each day. So it's not over yet. We're on the right track.
Studies from overseas show that there's less than 1 RNA chance of getting transmission outdoors in normal life. In fact, Mike Wynn, Professor from Canterbury, says there's virtually no cases we've identified that took place in sorts of outdoors every day. So do you have any other information or evidence that show that these are not?
So the relative risk is about 18 times less than indoors. Now that's That's substantially less. That's not zero. And when you're running down every single case and when you're wanting no transmission to occur between people, it's a small thing for a short period of time further to continue to reduce that risk. It's obviously also tricky for people to know exactly how they picked it up or where they picked it up. So for any one of those cases of unknown acquisition, we can't find that it's been transmitted in the indoor places that they've recalled. That probably means it was in some other location. So it is hard to pin down for some of those outdoor transmission risks.
So what you're saying today, though, Professor, what you're saying today doesn't give much hope to businesses, particularly small businesses.
No, I'm not saying anything in relation to businesses. All I'm saying is that we are maintaining restrictions as we've laid out for this week, with a review each and every day. And it's looking good in terms of the control of numbers today as a zero, and days ahead. I guess so. I think people look at the circumstances for their business and they're trying to make comparisons with other businesses. It is the cumulative risk of interactions, and I think, again, as Professor Cheng probably outlined a number of times, indoor settings, prolonged contact, physical exertion, singing and the like are higher risk. And so those are the settings that we're focused on in terms of maintaining restrictions. But we will get to a point where we're confident that there are so few cases, if any, that all settings can be open with appropriate controls.
Can I just ask about the mystery cases? Just got one more. Last week, there were mystery cases got locked down. This week, the 6 people mystery cases were opening up. Some people say that is very contradictory. Can you explain why?
Well, certainly we're working through all of the primary close contacts who remain in quarantine. We've seen some mystery cases, and they were Delta variant mystery cases that we didn't know where the first case might have been. We've now identified that first case, so there's a period of time prior to which it hasn't been in the community. We're looking at a couple of weeks of potential transmission. We've had high testing numbers, including in the 50,000 range over that period of time when we were looking for any other mystery cases. So to have 300,000 tests in a week or thereabouts is very reassuring. We're still wanting people to test, but we've had a number of days with no further cases identified outside of those primary close contacts. That is reassuring, but we're not opening up fully for that reason.
Just in terms of what happens next, and especially around giving people like to know what's going to happen. So what would cause you to crank restrictions up again? What sort of things or results should people worry about?
Of course, mystery cases where there are concerns about high-risk settings would be of concern. On the contrary, cases that emerge who are in quarantine are reassuring. I wish I could give certainty to people, a week in advance. A week is unfortunately like an eternity for coronavirus, because if there's something out there that hasn't been identified, that's transmission that's occurring potentially in really significant settings like aged care or disability services, or an essential workplace setting where there are loads and loads of interactions. So we have to be aware that those things can still surprise us. Overall, the awareness of this, people doing the right thing, people testing in high numbers, and the vaccinations that are occurring are protecting more and more people.
And can I just ask one more? Just going forward, is there any contemplation by the Victorian government of not a blanket lockdown? Is there any way you can do something like do ventilation audits of schools so you can say, yes, some schools can open and others can't? Is there any way you cannot impose all of the conditions on everyone?
Every single measure that we're doing outside of these outbreaks, even during these outbreaks, are to try and mitigate that risk of an outbreak occurring. That is the best insurance against lockdowns, in addition to high vaccination coverage. We're getting to a point where more than 50% of those over 70 are vaccinated. So if the virus is introduced into a room full of elderly people, much less chance of that becoming an outbreak. So vaccination and continuing to push and offer up the vaccine is a really key measure. But everything to do with quarantine, everything to do with maintaining higher levels of testing, they are all measures that reduce the risk of outbreaks getting to a point where they're out of control. The response to this happened at a point where the first case identified, there were already 4 generations of transmission that occurred. There were already a couple of weeks of this virus moving around. That makes it particularly challenging to manage just in terms of individual cases.
Brett, can I just dig deeper into the issue that Dennis raised before about businesses? So 2 days ago you asked gyms to make a sacrifice for the rest of the state to not open for another week. And you cited data saying there were 27 cases in a gym in Hallam last year. Now the industry tells us that that case wasn't an actual commercial gym, that it was a warehouse type friends setup. The transmission occurred there. And the industry have also told us they have data which shows that 6 million check-ins have occurred at gyms since November, so after the Hallam case, since the Hallam case, with no transmission at all. I'm conscious that the gyms may have been exposure sites, but can you see their argument there? Why are you asking them to make this sacrifice for another week when they're not getting any Commonwealth support at all while they're staying shut?
Well, I can't address the issue of Commonwealth support for gyms, but it's not just on the Victorian data with respect to the Hallam outbreak. It is the international experience of gyms, including settings where people have been tested prior to being in gyms, where they've had spacing of individuals, where they've had density quotients effectively, and where they've tried to put in all of those disinfection and cleaning measures, and they've still had significant outbreaks. It is a reality that exertion indoors and prolonged contact becomes a transmission risk. I think the industry has absolutely done it tough. I know they are ready and willing to do whatever they can to try and mitigate the risk. It remains a high-risk environment.
If another outbreak occurs, would you recommend another lockdown?
I have never said that lockdowns are the first measure. They will never be the first measure. They will be a measure that we implement when we have to and only when we have to. All of those things to stop outbreaks occurring are the things that we need to focus on. And as we have always done in Victoria, including with single cases out in the community, with the Park Royal transmission, with the Blackrock transmission, it was significant numbers and they were still managed through contact tracing. We've had single individuals exposing a number of sites in Victoria without a lockdown, without a circuit breaker, because contact tracing does the job. It is a different story when you've got 4 generations of transmission before you find that first case, especially with these variants of concern. Each on their merits. We will see. There will be mystery cases who've had very little interaction. There will be mystery cases where there is quite a significant suggestion of where they might have picked it up geographically or otherwise. So, you know, no one size fits all for making determinations around this, each on its merits.
The Premier yesterday said that she had great confidence in her health system on 7:30 report as to never lock down again and try to avoid lockdown. I ask the Deputy Premier maybe, do you have the same confidence in your health system to not lock down again?
Thanks, Acting Premier. Certainly every bit helps. With respect to the risk of lockdowns, every bit helps, whether it's another 2%, another 5%, another 10%. We're adding, you know, almost 1% per day, which is fantastic. You know, there is that randomness about who that first case might be in the state. If they're in a household where most of that household is vaccinated, that can be totally game-changing for the risk of transmission. So every little bit helps. In terms of that magic herd immunity threshold number, that is really difficult. It does depend on the vaccines that are used and in what proportion. Other variants of concern that might emerge, if they're more transmissible, it's trickier. If they've got immune evading capability, it's trickier, but it's still the case that more helps, and the higher the proportion, the better off we are overall.
Can I just ask you something? There are many personal stories. We get things thrown up with partners who can't be with loved ones or procedures after miscarriages? Is that one of the sacrifices that we all must cop to because COVID? That's one situation.
There are so many sad stories, and there are so many struggles that people report on. My heart goes out to them. I cannot fathom what it's meant across Victoria through a lockdown and through all of the circuit breakers and lockdowns across Australia. We are doing this with the minimum kind of restrictions that keep us safe. The alternative of this running away is too awful to imagine in some respects. We would always work to keep a cap on cases, but if it means longer lockdowns and more stringent lockdowns, that's terrible. If it means letting it run and, as some modelling has suggested, thousands of deaths, that is awful. And so these are the dilemmas of public health decision making. And as I say, awful stories with people, and you cannot but feel great sympathy for people's individual struggles. It weighs on me each and every day. I always have in mind what the alternative would be, and so these decisions are absolutely to try and keep Victorians safe, but also safe from what it would mean for a longer lockdown or a more stringent lockdown, because a variant of concern that is as infectious as the Delta variant or even the Kappa variant can really infect thousands of people within a matter of weeks.
Brad, before you go, thanks. On vaccines, is there going to be any discussion in AHPPC, or do you have a view on whether eligibility ages can be changed? For instance, could more over 50s, say 50 to 59, have access to Pfizer to maybe boost the number of people getting vaccinated? Well, I understand also Jeanette Young this morning also raised that the definition of an adult in Queensland would be 16. I'm just yet to clarify whether she meant that anyone over 16 can get a vaccine or not. But is there any discussion around that?
HPPC aren't the decision maker there. It is the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation, ATAGI. You know, if their advice is that there should be a shift in age groups and specific vaccines, I'd support it. They are the experts in that area. It would probably make a difference for some people. I know that vaccine hesitancy has been greater for AstraZeneca vaccine, and so ATAGI would obviously bear that in mind as well in terms of uptake, but at the moment that's not an HPPC discussion. In terms of the youngest age group, you need a vaccine that's approved through the TGA in Australia for use down to that age group. But as soon as it's a registered vaccine on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods and that there's an ATAGI recommendation to use it, terrific to roll out.
Sorry, what's the future?